measuring for the proper push rod length with using the heads. So what I got here is a couple springs. They're pretty small, pretty light, heavy enough to hold up a valve, but not too heavy to collapse a lifter. So the point of that being is that basically what we're going to do is turn over an engine, and I have a push rod length checker. It's sitting right there. And what I'm going to do is I need to put these springs in instead of the valve springs here, so that I don't collapse the lifter. That way I can get an accurate measurement as I rotate the engine over. So here you can see I have my head on the block. I got my tiny springs in here. You can press these down, pretty easy. Cannot press those. So you notice I do not have my head gasket on. These are some old head bolts like that. So I have those just kind of snug down right around here just to make sure basically that I'm tight to the block. Anyways, it's probably not necessary, it's probably fine, but just makes me feel a little bit better that it's just snug down a bit. So now I did put a little bit of oil in these lifters. They're probably all leaked out. I just put a few drops in, but that spring pressure in there, it's really hard to press versus these springs. So I'm pretty confident that I'm not going to press the lifter down versus the spring. So that's where I get into the measurement point using my tool here to pick this up from Summit Racing. I also picked up the springs. They were pretty cheap, and then I can get to do some calculations with that. I have my push rod length checker installed, and you can see it's very loose right now, but I'm just gonna start tightening this down. I'm gonna leave it, or I'm gonna set this at 7.8 inches, which is a stock GM length to start with, and then tighten this down and see if it's gonna work for spec. Hopefully it does, but that's why you check and measure it before you order them. So I wanted to do one of these quick before I showed, basically just to make sure I didn't mess it up. But you can see I got my push rod length checker installed right here. And what I did is I took a black Sharpie and drew on top of the valve stem here and just colored it in. And then I came over here, put my rocker arm on, tightened it down, did the proper valve lash, or not the proper valve lash, excuse me. I tightened it down to 0 load, but since I have this tiny spring in here, I did not add the preload to the lifter. So this was a 0 preload situation, but it was touching. So as close as I could get it to 0 preload. At that point, I took the engine, turned it over, so it was 2 complete turns, just so that I could get a complete revolution of this lifter. After that, took it all apart, and then came over here and looked at it, and you can see, it's almost tough to see if I can focus on it, but that little darker line right in the middle there, so you can see that hard line on the back and the front. So that's telling me maybe I'm just a bit on the short side for the push rod, but that length is definitely going to work. It's very close to the middle. Keeping in mind, I do have to add in my 20 thousandths of lifter preload and add in my head gasket thickness, the compressed head gasket thickness, and 20 thousandths of an inch additional for the lifter preload. So I take this length, measure it tip to tip, add in my head gasket thickness, add in my lifter preload, and that's my proper push rod length for the exhaust valves. Now after I do the exhaust, I need to come over, do the intake separately, and do that measurement. So I had to get a hold of my caliper again, but anyways, I remeasured my push rod end to end, and I know there's a common size at 7.8 inches basically is the stock Chevy size that they use a lot, but they have a I needed a little bit longer maybe, and so there's a 7.950 inch. And so this is what I have at 7.950, and it's tough to tell right there, but I'm maybe a little bit over center, so maybe just a little bit too long. Perfectly okay for sure to run. But that being said, I'm going to go into the math of what I need to calculate, because I don't have my head gasket, and I need to incorporate the 20 thousandths preload on the lifter. Okay, so for calculating the push rod length, I started with my push rod at 7.950, add in my head gasket thickness, compressed head gasket thickness, subtract out my lifter preload, and this is what I get, the 7.977. So basically, I guess to reiterate, if I back calculate this, if I put in a 7.977 push rod right now, without a head gasket, without any lifter preload, then it's going to be the same thing as having a 7.950. So basically, I just need to, if I put this in my engine and set it to 7.977 inches long, then I know that the 7.950, which is a standard push rod length, will work for me for this engine. So that's the way I'm going about this, kind of a little bit backwards, but it works. And so, like I said, you can see where my pattern's at, and well, maybe, yeah, right in the middle of the valve stem there. So that's right where I want it to be. So as far as the exhaust valves, that's going to work for me. Now I need to measure the intake. So here's my push rod length checker. Putting it in my caliper, 7.979. That's pretty close. So I'm gonna just double check this again at this length, and I'm gonna redraw on my valve stem, and just to reconfirm that I'm gonna have the right length, and then do the intake. So hopefully it's the same. So I'm checking my intake valve here. You can see right where that's sitting, maybe, but actually it almost looks like it's over center, but I'm gonna take a look at it now and see what it shows. See how fast I can get this apart. Well, this one's really tough to see since it's not very fresh, but it's actually more of a wear mark between this part and this part. It looks like, to me at least. Might be worth checking out again, but yeah, so that's what I'm seeing. It looks like my push rod length is a little bit too long here, and I need to shorten it up. So I tried using the same push rod length as on the exhaust, but it looks too long here. I'm going to try cleaning this one up. There we go. Redrawing it on and checking it one more time. Well, I'm glad that I redid this, because I didn't change my push rod length, and look at that wear mark. It's perfectly right in the middle, right where I want it to be. So I'm going to use the same push rod lengths, intake and exhaust, it looks like, based on that calculation there. So I'm going to end up with 7.950 length push rods, which is 150 thousandths over stock. I'll get my springs put back in, and then get my head bolted down, and should probably cover up my timing chain too. But yeah, making progress. But yeah, pretty simple. That's all there is to it. Checking your push rod length, it's pretty important, just so that you have the right valve train geometries. If you have the wrong geometry, you're going to get, if you're lucky, just premature wear on everything. If you're not so lucky, you might wipe a cam lobe or something, or hang a valve up. If you're pushing on the valve here, you're pushing it kind of at an angle instead of straight down like how it should be. So that's why it's important to have your proper valve train geometry. So that's why you just check it. Otherwise, you can order several different lengths of push rods and check them once it's together, or you just buy your $15 checker, and yeah, just from Comp Cam piece, it's from Summit Racing, it's like 15 bucks. So just saves me the time of and the hassle of ordering multiple different sets.